appear to be impartial. And this next issue is something we'll get into, ex parte communication. That's communication between you as a decision maker and a proponent or an opponent in the matter being decided. That is prohibited. Now, there are some exceptions, and we'll get into that. But theoretically, if you have an applicant that you know is coming to the next meeting, you should not be out having a discussion with them about the project that's coming in. You can talk to them about the weather or your kid's soccer or that kind of stuff, but the actual case that's before you, you should not be having that conversation with them.
So when the case actually finally gets on the agenda is when you should...
Yes. So there may be a development that's going to come and apply for a case in a year, and they may be talking to you about, oh, we've got this great idea, we're going to build a rocket and plant in our backyard, and we're going to start doing all this crazy stuff. And you can talk to them about that all you want until they apply to build the rocket factory in their backyard. Then you are now in a quasi-judicial role, and you might have to make a decision. So the appearance of fairness, you can't talk about that. Now, that is related to quasi-judicial proceedings. That's where you're actually making a legal decision. Now, there are a lot of opportunities for you to make recommendations to the City Council, like adoption of new codes, adoption of comprehensive plans. You can talk to people about that stuff because it's not quasi-judicial. You're not making a legal decision or a judicial decision on a specific case. You can talk to people about whether or not we need more housing or more commercial or more industrial. That's all fair game because there's no single legal judicial decision that you have to make. And no member, no member may engage in ex parte communication with respect to the proposal. That's the key, because it's got to be that judicial role and a proposal. The exception is if somebody talks to you about a case and they pigeonhole you and you're in the car for a 2-hour drive coming back from a meeting and they just won't stop talking, that's fine, because specifically you have a responsibility when that case comes before you to say, for the record, I spent a 2-hour drive in the car with this person, it was very painful, and they talked about it the whole way. They talked to me about A, B, C, and D. I did not express my opinion or I sympathized with them, but you have the opportunity to declare that you had ex parte communication. Ex parte basically means outside of the process, outside of a public forum. So you can say, this person talked to me about this, and I went to a dinner party, and this person talked to me about this, and this person talked to me about this. It doesn't preclude you from participating in that. You just have to declare it. And the reason why that's important is the public announcement that gives other parties the opportunity to rebut the substance or to challenge your impartiality. Because you can say, I talked to every member of my family about this and blah, 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 blah. And the proponent should have the opportunity to say, okay, well, if this is near and dear enough to your heart that you are talking to all of your family about it, I don't believe you can be impartial, and that fairness is not there. And so you would have to determine whether or not there is an appearance of fairness and decide whether you step down. The reason why these are important is because as a appointed commissioner for the city will protect you and take legal action to protect you if there are issues of lawsuits and those kind of issues, because you're acting in the public's interest and in the city's interest. However, if you are acting unethically or improperly, the city is not obligated to protect you. So if it comes out that your brother-in-law who doesn't like you was taping the conversation the whole time and you were saying inappropriate things and you acted on that process or that case, the city may say, well, we're not going to spend money to defend you because you're clearly acting unethically, and if they sue you, you are on your own. So that's why I emphasize this, because the city will protect you from personal financial obligations as long as you're acting in good faith. Questions? Brian, I can see you formulate. No? Okay. Okay. So the other one is conflict of interest. This is a RCW as well, and it prohibits municipal officers from using their position to gain advantage, either for themselves or others, as a result of your position. Now, this is also a pretty serious thing because it can come in several forms, whether it's special exemptions or privileges, whether it's contracts from the city to do certain jobs because you know the staff that you're dealing with, whether it's accepting employment or engagement in business activity, which might reasonably require or induce you to disclose information that you found out as a result of your job here. Now, the good news is all of the land use work that we do, it is all public record, which basically means unless you have a direct financial benefit, so in other words, if we're discussing a subdivision that you own or that your brother owns or that your son owns, those are the type of situations where there's a direct result of financial profit from a decision that you make. Those are conflicts of interest. But if we're talking about, we're making zoning changes, anybody who watches this video at home can get on the internet and make an offer on a piece of property that you are discussing. So a lot of the information, 99% of the information that we discuss is public. So the only time you really need to worry about conflicts of interest is if you have a direct financial gain from some of the decisions that you make. So I've given you copies of both of these RCWs so that you can take a look at them. They are nuanced, but generally the advice is you need to identify if you have conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest. So any questions about that? Okay, so that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of the basics, and we'll continue to do more education as we go along, especially about how to run the meetings and that kind of stuff. So, but these are the big ones. The stuff I want to make sure that you understand that the city will take action to protect you legally, but only if you're acting in good faith and you're following these certain regulations. We'll also send you to some trainings. They're called planning short courses where they talk about this and how to participate and how to handle neighbors, because you're going to start getting people who approach you in safe way and give you their opinion, and how to handle that and keep yourself legally safe in those kind of situations. So.
Yes. I'll also say about the short course in local planning. It's offered by the Department of Commerce, and all of the sessions are available online if you'd like to watch it in the next 2 weeks maybe. It's on their website, also on YouTube, so you can see all of the presentations. And next time it comes to town or a nearby town, it's excellent. I just went through one when it came to Camas, and it's great because it's tailored for new commissioners, so they'll explain your role as a planning commissioner, and it's also for new staff, and they'll explain the staff role and then how you interact, and it's an excellent course. You can meet other planners and other commissioners around Southwest Washington.
Yes, and it'll have nonprofits, and it'll have volunteers, and it'll have, one of the good things about going to one is you meet people who do a ton of different jobs, and it's your opportunity to kind of hear what they're worried about and how they run you get ideas how to run your business.
If you could provide us with that link to the YouTube stuff or whatnot, that'd be useful.
Yeah.
Will do.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody want to discuss anything further that Travis is going through before we move on to the next?
The pamphlets that you sent us in the email that you sent us all, is that the same as this, or did that include the text that you had in the slideshow?
I can send you the revised version if you want it, because I looked at it and I decided I would add some updates to it.
Sure.
So.
Can we get water around here someplace?
Oh, yeah. Do we have any
There's
water
water.
back there? We can take a break, too, if we want to go use some water. I'll take one, too, Joyce, please. Or Janice, sorry.
Don't take a quick break.
Disappeared. I don't know what all the water is.
Okay. Let's take a quick 5-minute break.
I move to recess for.
That's what she put in the notes.
5 minutes.
Oh, okay,
I found it.
Guess I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
I found it. It's right here, all the motions.
Yes.
There are cups and there's water.
That's what we had to use last time too, is water cups,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. So.
They don't have bottles.
Travis, have you ever done a quiz action at the short course?
No.
You should be.
Extra practice, right? Spend enough time doing this.
I wonder what is the thing for discussing things? Networking, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's
So, are you related
quite
to
often.
Mary?
it's
I am, yeah.
your
Are you
boss
on
or
CC?
Or your.
That is my uncle. Jeff.
Your uncle, Jeff, okay.
Over there?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and then beside him is Tom, Tom. That's Lisa's brother.
I'm way on the far end next to Tanya and Jamie
Okay, yeah, I
and
know them.
Chad.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you probably
Yeah.
won't find out.
So, but I was talking to Mary and she had mentioned
Yeah,
that.
but like,
So I was
everything
thinking
else.
that she had relations with him, and I thought, well, that must be him.
No, I live over on the other side there.
Okay.
Right across from by that yard.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I grew up on Hoffman Street. And then after that on my road, so that's out towards the golf course.
So you have a whole family tree,
Oh,
you
yeah.
guys all grew up here?
Yeah, third generation, so.
That's the other thing that amazed me is just how much the people stay here.
Yeah.
They don't take off.
Well, I moved away for a little while. And
Did you
then
come back?
I came back, yeah. Well, you realize that you want your family to grow up in a small town, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, then you end up coming back, so.
Yeah, well, I grew up in rural Minnesota, my husband in Fairbanks, Alaska, so this has the same energy, the people have the same energy, but it doesn't have snow.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
So again, as a reminder, even during breaks, your microphones are on and recording, so never forget. There is a mute button on them though,
That must be.
but it doesn't mean that somebody else's mic won't pick you up, so. Yeah.
I work for Clark County,
That's what I thought.
a review plan person. I do- No, I can't apparently.
So typically, if there's a workshop or a hearing, there will be like a full paragraph description, like from the legal notification. So you would normally need to read the entire title into the record, so that, but today you don't need to worry about that.
Oh, under different headings, and there'd be a paragraph that I have to read the entire thing. You'll have to do some hand-holding, Travis. The first part of this meeting was a little painful, I'm sure.
And actually, for a recess or adjournment, you don't have to have a motion.
Oh,
You, as chair, can declare it.
okay,
You can ask others' opinions, but you have the power to declare that.
okay.
It always irritates me when they.
I will not exercise that as a right, by the way. If you need a break, you just let me know. I don't believe that anybody should be forced to be on the bathroom schedule of the chair. Everybody ready to keep going?
Sure.
Please continue, Travis.
So, so the next thing I just wanted to talk to you about, and that is the code enforcement language, and the second and the third one, we kind of combined that into a single item, because really what we wanted to talk about is the list of what we call retooling our code list. It's essentially an ongoing list of code corrections or changes that staff or the public has identified, and the list keeps getting longer and longer and longer, and our assignment for this year was to work on a couple meaty things, but to try and correct a bunch of that little housekeeping stuff that really needed to be done pretty badly. So kind of to start the conversation, I wanted to have started off talking about code enforcement language, because staff has been doing a lot of work internally, so we've made a lot of progress on this, and it's almost ready to present to you, so we figured we'd give you a chance to get a quick look at it, and then we'll really dive into it next month. No, it's not. So it's the stuff that was on your table when you got here, so you'll have a chance to look at it next month, and we'll talk about it, yeah. So, to give you some background on this before you dive into that, the development code that our code enforcement officer deals with, and she'll get a chance to talk to you about that in a couple minutes, is when we talk about development codes, we're talking about building and construction, Title 14. Title 15 is our environmental, our wetland, our habitat codes. 16 is our subdivision code, that's the division of property. Zoning is the use regulations for our code, and then the development administration code, that's kind of the process, how we process things in our code. There are also some associated codes that are associated with development, so streets and sidewalks that get constructed, but it also includes how they're maintained and other kind of technical issues, the day-to-day operations. There's water and sewage, Title 13, and Title 18, which is annexation, when people want to become part of the city. Those are also considered development codes that our code enforcement officer deals with. There are also some other codes that we'll get to a chance to talk about next month that we're trying to tie into the code enforcement's area of responsibility. But this kind of ties into the unfinished workload from 2018. We had a lot of big items on our agenda, but we didn't get all of them done. So we got the Planning Commission rules done, we got a new wireless cell tower ordinance done, we got the comp plan updated, and we got some other small things done. But there was a lot of stuff here that we didn't get a chance to, so we're going to try and tackle that this year.
Can you go back to that last slide?
Okay, sure.
It's not all, I don't think all those are on this little shenanigan here. Sorry.
They are not.
Short
So
term.
this is a revised list.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, and
Sorry.
we
Just like-
and we will send you a list, and I'll show you a picture of what it looks like, and I'll teach you how to read it so that you can so that the Greek makes sense when you get the chance to. So my personal philosophy is when we talk about code, code should be grouped in three ways. A use, like a zoning, a standard, which is kind of a physical development standard, and then the other one is a process. Now the difference is will become clear as we deal with this more often, and that is a process is how we physically process a permit, how it goes through the process. Whether somebody is applying for a 30-lot subdivision or an 80-lot subdivision, the process should be exactly the same. We hold a pre-application conference, we accept their application, we route it to the fire marshal, we route it to the engineer. Every process should be exactly the same, or every project should be processed exactly the same. So that way it comes to you having followed all the steps before it, and you'll have the opportunity to look at that case knowing that everything that should have been done was done. So that's kind of the physical processing of the documents. A use has to do with what a building or what a structure or what a property is used for versus a physical standard of how tall is it, how wide is it, how far is it set back from the property. That's a physical aspect of development that doesn't necessarily relate to the use. So for example, when you look at the comprehensive plan map, we have industrial property, we have commercial property, we have residential property. Those are the uses that can occur on a property. Whether it's a big building or a small building, whether it's an attractive building, whether it's outside storage, whether it's indoor storage, those are all physical characteristics that are going to be manifested on each property. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to organize our code so that it's easy to find information and it's clear to apply. The reason why that's important is because applicants, people who are trying to develop and invest their money in the community, they want to know exactly what's going to happen and when, and they want to know exactly what standards they physically have to build to, and they want to know that the use that they want to build, that it's permitted. So it's all about predictability and risk for applicants. But as a citizen, you want to be able to know that I live in this residence, I'm expecting a residential building next door, I'm not going to get a rocket launching pad next door, I'm not going to get an industrial use next door. There's a predictability for me as the neighbor, just like there's a predictability for the developer. So the updated code priorities and the things that we're going to try and tackle first is code enforcement, and then the planned unit residential stuff. We're going to talk about different types of residential housing and standards that will make good quality residential development more attractive for the community. And then we have to update our sign ordinance because there's been some lawsuits that have changed how signs are treated. Also, downtown parking in the central business district, the council and the past planning commission expressed interest in taking some kind of steps that will help revitalize the downtown. So these are kind of what has grown out of past discussions, and as we're making progress through these, if you want to add things or go in a new direction, then you can just strictly have that conversation amongst yourselves, and if 3 of you agree, then you can assign new priorities, and we'll have that discussion as we go along. So there are a couple things that you get. So this is the one that you will typically get. You can't read this very well, but over here is a code number. That's how to find it in our code. And then we've identified a problem and then a fix. So for example, in this, it's not the one you have in front of you. So the first thing is, like for example, in this code section 1440, it says seal level. That's just a spelling mistake, and we need to fix it to say sea level. These are the kind of housekeeping things that littered throughout our code, and we'll be able to get through a ton of these with very little effort, theoretically. But that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see on our Retooling Our Code list. Now, the big document that you have in front of you, that's the matrix that staff has been using to do internal analysis of some of the more meaty issues. Like, for example, this is our code enforcement section. And what you have over here, again, is the code section, so that you could look it up on the internet if you're interested. This is what the actual code section says. And the problem is that staff believes that we need to eliminate this section and we need to make a correction. And so the staff comments here basically say we need to drop the time limits because the time limits are defined elsewhere in code. What our code typically does is it has one section that says, oh, your permit is good for a month. Then we have another section that says, oh, your permit is good for 6 months. And then when you actually go to the building code says you're good for 6 months. And if you keep having building inspections and you're making progress, your permit stays open and you can keep going and because some projects take longer than 30 days. But there's probably an obscure reference in our code somewhere that says your permit is no good after 30 days. So we're trying to eliminate and identify those. So some of these are like super easy and logical and common sense. And some of them you'll go down this list and take the next month, kind of think about it and try and understand where we're going. And you'll read our comment, and our comment will say, what exactly does this mean? And we haven't quite explored that comment yet, so we moved on to the next section. But that's kind of what we will be asking you to do, and that is you'll be looking at a code section, and you may read it and say, I don't care about that, and you don't bother with the comment, or you may read our comment and you may totally disagree with us, and we may get down into the weeds on one section and then skip the next 6 pages to the next section that somebody wants to talk about. But the last column that you'll see here, and that is the Clark County Code. I spent 15 years in Clark County, so I'm very familiar with how the code was worked, and I was part of the crew that helped revise the code back in 2006, 2004. So some of the organizational stuff, I was there, participated in that. So there is a lot of good code in Clark County. So one of the things we did is we compare ours and theirs, and it looks like we all used the same lawyer back in the 70s when a lot of this stuff was started. And they've adopted changes at a faster rate because they're growing differently. So they've got a lot of legal opinions and have made a lot of changes that make sense for us to adopt as well. But there are other cases where we look at Olympia, or we look at Kelso, or we look at Kalama, and we will include other code recommendations in that language. So because we were working on the code enforcement process, I just want to give you a quick overview so that you kind of understand the code enforcement process. Typically, when a complaint is submitted, Mary will submit or send the owner, property owner, or the responsible parties a couple letters, and we'll try and negotiate with them and to get things fixed. If it doesn't get done, we have a process called a notice and order, and that's essentially where the city says, okay, we've tried to get you to do the right thing. We are issuing you a formal letter which says we expect you to do the right thing, and this is the code section you're responsible for fixing. If the applicant disagrees with us, they can appeal it, but essentially, if they don't appeal it, it becomes final notice and order, which basically says, okay, so now we all agree that this needs to be done. If you don't appeal it to court, you could be subject to financial penalties, and right now it's $15 a day for residential and $50 a day for commercial businesses. Whereas you look at a lot of other jurisdictions like Clark County, it might be $500, might be $250, it might be $100 per day. But essentially at some point, the city has to play hardball and say, if you don't solve this safety problem, we're going to start fining you $50 a day or $15 a day. So that's kind of a nutshell of the process that we're talking about. And I wanted to introduce Mary Parsons, who's our code enforcement officer. You will probably never have to deal with her unless you come into the office and file a complaint, or you are subject to a complaint. But I wanted to give her the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes. Mary, you want to come up?
So like Travis said, my name is Mary Parsons, and I've actually been here with the city since 2010. I am part-time. Previous to code enforcement in Woodland, I worked as a police officer for Washington County Sheriff's Office and the City of Vancouver for a little over 20 years. As Travis shared, there's the process of violation letters to the violator. My goal is to gain compliance and correct a violation. So prior to letters, it could perhaps be a personal contact and work with the violator and try to gain compliance. There are times where the violator maybe doesn't know they're in violation, or it's something that they've just overlooked, so it's brought to their attention. There's a variety of ways that I try to come up with to help them to correct the violation. In fact, sometimes I've had to get pretty creative trying to assist the violator by different ways. I've reached out to the chamber for assistance and different church groups. Sometimes I refer people to Make a Difference Day that occurs in October each year. The Veterans of Foreign War have stepped up and helped with situations. The high school students have. Again, just using some creativity to gain compliance and assist the person in correcting the violation. Oftentimes, during a personal contact, I might get kind of a feeling whether I'm going to follow this up with a letter immediately, because this might not go as well as I'm hoping. So that letter may go out immediately. But what my goal is to try to work with the community and gain their compliance. And when that's not always possible, then it will go to the letters and the notice and order and the final notice. There's certain times where perhaps the outcome there would be a civil lien on the property, like Travis shared, and there's been a few times where we've had to actually issue civil citations through the courts. Then we've actually had contractors go out and correct a violation, and or we've had Public Works go out and correct a violation. So on top of perhaps maybe a daily penalty, a civil penalty for the violation, there could potentially be a cost that the violator has to at some point eventually pay to the city for the cost of the work to be done. But generally, about, I'd say, at least 90% of people comply. But again, that takes sometimes time working with the individuals, sometimes kind of holding their hand through the process and trying to, reach a positive outcome of the correction of the violation. And the violations themselves, some of them are more difficult to resolved, basically. And some of them are relatively easy. So the time frame varies depending upon the actual situation. But again, my goal is to gain compliance and try to use whatever tools I can in order to do that. But again, like Travis said, there's the zoning type violations that I look at, which include your permits and your permits and zoning type situations. But there's also like health and sanitation. There's that vegetation falls under that. There's like animals, animal violations. Part of our zoning addresses that, as well as our animal code.
So
I
you're our
think-
animal control officer also?
I'm not the animal control officer, no, but I do deal with some of the animal complaints.
You wear a lot of hats as it is, it sounds like.
Yes, yes. For animal violations, our police department does, they will address some of those issues depending upon the time frame. I think they will do so after 5 p.m. when animal control is not working, so we're contracted with the county for animal control. But they basically will address like the dog issues, where I address raccoons and pigs and rabbits and those type of things. So, yes, that's part of it. Some of the violations they have up there, basketballs on the sidewalk, basketballs obstructing pedestrian traffic and or vehicular traffic. That's a very common issue that I deal with a lot. The fire hydrants, the obstruction of the fire hydrant, there needs to be a 3-foot circumference around the fire hydrant, and that needs to be clear. A lot of times, there's vegetation, sometimes trees and bushes. Then we have, again, sidewalk obstructions. It looks like maybe the next one is obstructed sidewalk by vegetation. The next two, perhaps. Signs, that's a big issue. Then there's, like, in the zoning code, there's RVs, and it looks like that one's probably obstructing a sidewalk, and, depending upon the property itself, if they reasonably can't get an RV in the side or backyard, they can have one in the front setback. The last one there is, it looks like an accumulation of junk on the property. That's under health and sanitation. I do address that quite often.
So Mary, are you completely complaint-driven then, or do you have to drive around and find violations? Or
No.
I mean, it's usually politically correct to wait for a complaint. It's usually kind of...
Yeah, this position is pretty much complaint-driven, and it's most of the complaints, come from the citizens of Woodland. There are some times when they come from somebody from outside the city, and that keeps me busy enough. So, yeah, it's just generally complaint-driven.
Do you feel that the city gives you enough flexibility? You had mentioned being creative a couple of times earlier.
Mhm.
So a lot of time, in my experience in Clark County, a lot of times people just don't have the financial resources to correct the violation. And so if the money isn't there, how do you find, or putting a lien on them doesn't really help, you know what I mean? So you can't get people to pay for something to be fixed if they don't have any money. And so they allow you to be more creative in your solutions.
Well, you're right. There's a lot of times it's a financial situation, yes, and that's why I try to reach out to different, like I said, church groups, the high school, the chamber, and try to find a resource for somebody that maybe is in a financial situation. And I've actually even had the complainant help the violator in order to eliminate a violation before. But just finding a resolution for the issue. And again, compliance is the goal. It's not to penalize them with a monetary penalty or, put a lien on their property. It's, I want to try to find a resolution for it. Yeah.
I would imagine that would be the occasional good parts of your job when the code enforcement officer shows up. Is anyone ever really glad that you showed up? You know what I mean?
I'm typically not invited.
No, right?
So
Yeah.
you're, so.
It's nice that you're given the flexibility to do that.
I just out of curiosity, of the cases in 2018, it was 295. How many of those did you put liens or fines on?
I would say probably less than maybe 5 or 6. Yeah.
And what was the outcome of that?
I'm thinking. I can recall one lien that's still out there. Some of them are still open cases, so it's. I guess I don't understand when you're saying the outcome. The outcome would, if there was a lien placed on the property, they either satisfied the lien or it's still an active lien on the property.
So if it's an active lien, are you still accruing fees on a daily basis?
Yes.
So from 2018, it's still open,
$15 a day.
$15 a day?
I do have one that's still open, yes.
Is it because you just can't get in touch with, the person doesn't call you back, or is it just?
Well, it's actually a situation where we tried to work with an individual and gave that individual a lot of time to come up with a resolution that would work for that person and the city. Actually, probably 6-7 months of back and forth, what would work and what wouldn't, and that property was eventually liened, yes.
And I don't know if you want to go into the weeds on this. I'm just curious, because I don't know the answer to it. You don't get the money until the property's sold with a lien, is that correct? Or does it accumulate so much until you can foreclose on the property?
I've actually
How
had,
does that work?
I've actually had properties that they satisfied the lien and then they paid the lien, paid the penalty.
So the lien is separate from the penalty? Is that what-
Well, the penalties could turn into the lien.
Okay.
So I guess there's the lien, and then there's this is the civil penalty, and then they turn around and they'll take care of it. But that's a very small percentage of that my investigations that that's the end result because of the non-compliance.
So what strikes me about these numbers that Mary deals with, and that is like 2018, 295 complaints. That's about a complaint a day for a full work week, and Mary doesn't work a full work week. So she essentially deals with 2 new complaints almost every day. And she's able to resolve 93% of them within the first 3 months of the complaint. So it's a considerable amount of workload that she spends a lot of time on. And the reason why we're talking to you about this is because one of the first things we've been trying to tackle, and that is our code enforcement case. So now we're talking about the 7%, but not really the 7% who are not cooperating, because that's just the first 3 months. It's really the 1% that just absolutely don't want to cooperate or don't want to do what the code requires them to do. So really, we're talking about in this process, the majority of Mary's time is kind of spent at front end negotiating and controlling and educating and getting people to want to do the right thing and doing the right thing. It's really kind of that outlier that absolutely she has spent a ton of time and she's not getting anywhere. At some point, the city really needs to say, okay, we're done negotiating. It's taken years and months or tons of hours. Mary would like to be able to say, okay, your fines are going to start at this date, and if you don't fix it, we're going to fine you every day. And after 90 days, we're going to put a lien on your property. And after 90 days after that, we're going to put another lien on your property. Like the great example that she has always used with me, and that is the city needed to actually go out and board a house. And we spent $2,400 securing a piece of property, and that's a lien that was filed against the property owner because we couldn't wait any longer. Now, the way our code is written is that code has since expired, so we may never recoup the taxpayer money, but this is a question that we need to have the conversation with you because you need to make a recommendation to the city council. Is that right? There are a lot of tools that she could use that she doesn't necessarily have a means to get us to. An example is the abatement fund. So if you get fined $50 a day, the way Clark County does it is if you pay your $50, $25 goes into the government general fund, but $25 goes into an abatement fund. So an abatement fund is money that Mary has the discretion to help other neighbors solve their problems. So maybe every spring we can rent giant boxes for people to do their yard debris. So if you can cut down all of your vegetation and have it hauled off for free, it might save her 200 letters and phone calls about my neighbor's yard looks like hell.
Do you have a list of stuff that you have ideas that you like? Things that you could use? Things like
Well,
that?
I guess that's one thing that would be nice is to give the citizens the opportunity to have, this open time frame and free dropping off of, something that you may not need that's been sitting in your yard for 6 months unused for its original purpose. If there was, we worked with waste control and had a drop box for a citizen, that would be good. I know Woodland's a small town. Even sometimes neighborhood mediation works, having maybe somebody that can come up with maybe helping that violator instead of me going out and trying to hold their hand and walk them all through the process and trying to find all these different solutions. Like I said, I've reached out to the chamber before to say, do you have any idea what I can do with this? Do you have any suggestions, any persons in the community that could step up and help out somebody? There's probably, there probably would be some ideas. Right off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but I'm sure that, there's certain things that, other cities or jurisdictions are doing or have done in the past that we might be able to look at and say, yeah, that would be a benefit to our community and just, use their ideas or something, but.
I think you should make a list for the next month. Little ideas.
I think.
Bring them to us.
I think the fact that you clear most of your cases, 93% of your cases in the first 3 months, Clark County would die to be able to say that.
Right.
And you're doing this part-time, so
Yeah.
hats off to you.
Yeah. I think we should help them.
Okay, thank you.
Clark County does that. They do those free boxes everywhere.
But it's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So part of what we're also doing as we go through this exercise and we talk about looking at our codes internally is Melissa pointed out that we are kind of establishing a list of things that we would like to be able to do and incorporate to make improvements to how the city operates. And so so we are keeping that list, and we will continue to distribute that to you so that you can see what we're working on and what we're doing and give us input and see where we're going. So could you go to the tab for 88 and 89? So this is where we get to the sausage making part of planning and some of the work that we're going to do. And I kind of wanted to give you an idea of how we're approaching it so that you can decide how much you want to dive into it and participate, or whether you just kind of want to let us do our thing and then kind of come in at the end and see how the process or what we've come up with. So this is essentially the progress we've made on these two code sections, 1788 and 1792. And some of it is very mundane stuff, but some of it is like crazy important. So if you can turn to page 4 of 12, and the top section there, I want to cover this one real quick because it gives you an idea of the kind of crazy stuff that we have to deal with. So section 1792-040, this is the right of entry section, and what our code says is, whenever necessary to make an inspection to enforce the provisions of any land use ordinance, or whenever the supervisor to believe that any building, structure, property, or portion thereof is being used in violation of any land use ordinance, the supervisor may enter such building, structure, property, or portion thereof at all reasonable times and inspect the same.
At their own risk.
At their own risk,
My
yes.
goodness.
And so, first of all, I'd like to point out that we have no person or position in the city called the supervisor. So one of the first things we did is we'd like to use the term responsible official. So sometimes I'm the responsible official, sometimes it's the building official, sometimes it's the public works inspector or the engineering inspector. So rather than saying this person is responsible for it, that is determined by the city in a case-by-case basis. So rather than changing this supervisor to director and this supervisor to public works director and this supervisor to the building official, we would like to just try and adopt the code where we use a single term, and the responsible official is whoever the mayor says it is. If he hires Melissa, Melissa is the responsible official because she's got that job. And when Melissa leaves to become a college professor, somebody else will take that job, and we don't need to change the code every time the name changes. We just want to use a generic term. Now, that's skipping the underlying fact that this is patently no longer legal. The city does not have the authority to just arbitrarily go onto your property because we suspect there's a violation. That is kind of old language, and it might not even have been legal when it was actually adopted. And so, in this case, you go over to the right-hand column, and this is what Clark County says, and that is, whenever necessary, to make an inspection to enforce the provisions of the land use or health ordinance, or whenever the director has reasonable cause to believe that there's a violation, the director may seek permission to enter the building. If permission to inspect is denied by the owner or a person in possession of the property, that we have to make reasonable attempts to pursue, and we may apply to a court to get a court order to go on the property. So in other words, we don't just arbitrarily decide like I currently have authority to do. What it says is, realistically, we have to approach the property owner and request permission. We believe there's a safety concern, and if they want us to help them discover whether there's a safety concern, they'll let us in. We can do an inspection. We can identify what the problem is, and the reason why there's something leaking is because of this, and the building official can help give them advice. Or if they tell us to pack sand and the answer is no, we have to talk to the attorney and say, we believe that this is a chemical hazard that's leaking and we need to get on the property, and if they think we have a good enough case, then they'll take us to court, and the judge will determine whether or not we need to get on the property. So what it means is, your basketball is blocking the sidewalk. We're not going to go to court on that. This is realistic language that means this is legally defensible versus our current code is not. So there are examples of, why it's important that we update this, because I don't want Mary thinking that, just because she's got the code, that she actually has the legal right to go out and do that, and I don't want her to, endanger her life by going up dark alleys and into people's backyards just because she may have the right to, but she may not really have the right to. So this is the kind of...
Get attorneys for that reason.
Yeah. So that's a kind of example of the process that we go through. And as you go down, you'll also notice that there are different colored notes here because it's different people making different comments on it. So I don't know if you necessarily are interested in going through this, all 5 of you, whether you maybe want to appoint a 2-person committee to look over individual and kind of report back to each other. Maybe there's something you're interested in talking about and you want to spend time with staff diving into something that interests you, that's on the list, and you can report to each other. That way it's not always coming from staff, but if you trust each other enough, one of you can do it, or all 5 of you need to do it. That's kind of what we need to talk about today.
If somebody, you are correct, and we say the sausage-making portion because it is interesting and it is a bunch of code language. If you're not interested in doing it, I don't see the reason that 5 people would have to go over every sentence, especially if it's, changing the supervisor to the responsible official. Things like that.
I agree.
But if somebody's interested in it and they want to volunteer to do that, by all means. Oh, okay. There's one.
Yeah.
Would you prefer having 2, at least 2? Or?
It's entirely up to you. Again, it's how you want to run the planning commission, and there may be stuff that Kim doesn't want to do, and somebody else may be asked to volunteer, or you may get, it can be a maximum of 2 because 3 of you is a quorum, and you can't meet and discuss something as a quorum anymore.
Gotcha. I do have a lot of experience in this stuff, just because I deal with it all the time. If you want Kim and I to do it, I would be willing to do it. If you guys trust us to do it, then just give you a summary of what we decided, and then we can talk about it and vote on it. And if we don't agree with it, we can discuss it further at that point.
Well, we do that.
Does that sound
Yeah.
reasonable?
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as we prepare these documents to you, we will continue to feed them to you through your email address. So just because you're not necessarily in these discussions, you're still going to have complete transparency what's going on. And it just means when we meet next month, you might raise 3 or 4 questions because, you still have questions about the work that was done, because this has to be a fair and transparent process, and it has to appear to be fair, and it also has to actually be fair. So.
And I'm sure I might be repeating what Travis just said, but if we go through a list of 40 of these things or whatnot, and 38 of them are just minor, and you only have a problem with 2 of them, we can exempt those and approve the other 38.
That's what I was going to suggest. Is
We can itemize stuff and take stuff out if we want. So.
If they're not, if they're hot button things, we can
Sure,
discuss
if you
them.
want, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy with that arrangement if you are.
Okay. So
Are you okay with that?
So what we will try to do is we'll try and keep it kind of in this format so that there's the current code, and then there's kind of our analysis, and then what other people are doing, and we'll try and keep it clear enough so that even if you're not in the conversations, you know where we're going. The other thing we will do is we'll try and compartmentalize it into chunks that you can chew in a single meeting. And so like code enforcement is a great example. So we might try and do changes for code enforcement at the next meeting, and then we will give you a blank copy of this that includes like the residential subdivision stuff that we want to talk about next. That way you have at least a month to look at it and decide whether or not you want to dive into it or whether you have comments. So that way when it actually does come to the meeting and you see some proposed changes, you already have a little bit of a background. On the other hand, you know, you may not be interested in the code enforcement stuff, and you may not even read your packet. You just show up, listen to the conversation because you're comfortable, you know, the 5-0, you're comfortable with it. So it's going to be entirely up to you as to how much you need to engage. So we'll try and feed you information as early as we can. And we may not always be successful at that, but conversations will continue to occur even after we send stuff to you like this packet. We make more changes afterwards.
Travis, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Okay.
When we, Kim and I, look at this, are you going to give us something already with your ideas and stuff in it? You said, or the blank, you mentioned the blank one.
So,
Because that's a lot of
With the
discussion.
residential one.
yes.
That's
So for example, this first column, the red is the proposed changes that we
Sure.
propose to make. So if you were to just read the entire thing start to finish, that's what the existing code says. But we're suggesting you drop off the
Okay.
entire.
So that's a lot of work for Kim and I to look at these cold and come up with this ourselves. I was hoping you
Right.
would
I
do a
don't think we would
recommendation.
do that.
You would do a recommendation and we.
Yep.
It looked like
First-
there's
okay.
recommendations.
Okay, good. I
Yes.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, and so we might be able to do 90% of the work and then schedule an hour with the two of you, and you can go through, well, I disagree with this, but the rest of it looks fine. Then we'll focus that hour on what's important to
Does that
you.
hour have to be on the Thursdays, or
No.
could it be any time with?
Could be any time, and it could
it's
be
good for both of us?
separately, or it
Okay.
could be the two of you together. It'll depend on how much time
Okay.
you can spare. And I can do it on the weekends or the evenings as well, so it doesn't have to be during the day, so. Okay, Melissa, I've been doing a lot of the talking. Do you want to maybe weigh in on anything or discuss this? Because Melissa's going to be doing a lot of this stuff too. She's got a great mind for code, and she does a lot of analysis and research outside of what's in our code. So if you have questions or you'd like ideas explored, Melissa's got a great mind for that. So she'll be able to do a lot of stuff that I won't, because I'm not as great a mind as she does. So
I'm happy to sit down with you two and just pour through every detail. I kind of like it.
I think it's a good opportunity to dive into your code, to be honest, and just familiarize myself with sections that I don't have any idea.
yeah. Anything to add?
Okay. Do you want to move on to the staff reports? Do you have anything in there? Do you want to do a breakdown or recap or department report, second quarter final?
So we're going to start sending the quarterly reports to you so that you can see the information that's being passed on to the city council. One of the reports that we get on a monthly basis is from our building code, and what this shows is, or from our building permit system. What this shows is the total number of building permits, new construction, and the types of permits that's coming in for a monthly basis, so you can kind of see whether we're busy or not.
These are actually what's been issued, not the ones that have just come in for review. This is issued permits that have been paid for in that given month.
Sorry, thank you. So this is the total permits up top for 2019 to date through June. And then down below, we've separated out the residential stuff so that we can see the difference between the two. Another report that you will start to get, and this is the recap report. And this is includes some of the financial information for the permits. Again, these are issued. So you can see how many residential construction permits. Now, what you need to recognize is they're not all brand-new residential permits. So if somebody wants to get a new water heater, that's a residential permit. So the number of permits, the amount, the value of work that was done is in the second column, and the fees they paid. And then over here on the right-hand side is the commercial and industrial columns, and how much permitting is done on that side.
These two forms, they're not automatic. What I do is I prepare a spreadsheet with all of the permits in it. This one is derived straight from that, the recap, or the breakdown, excuse me. If you go back to the breakdown, the breakdown is actually, I physically count the permits that come in. This one's not an automated one. And the color coding represents the different things. So you can see, if you want to know how much new construction there was, the new construction is at the top, and then below in the residential, where there's single family and duplexes. Those are the new construction. Everything else is a fence or a remodel or whatever it is. You can see by the categories how those permits break down for the month. The other sheet, the recap, is basically just a summary of all of those lines together, and it just shows you what our actual issued permits funds look like.
What's the value of knowing the valuation of the construction? Is that just whatever they write down on their application, what the project costs, or
it's usually the fair market value that they give us, but it also is subject to revision by our plan reviewers. So if they give us a fair market value that's completely out of line, our plan reviewer will revise that, and I'll update that.
is that what the fee is based on? Is that why your plan reviewers, okay, that would make sense.
In many cases, any new construction, any additions, any remodels, yes.
Different, like, 0 to 500 is this much of a fee, and that's how that works?
It's a little bit more.
I'm sure it's
It's
probably.
kind of complex. Some of the fees, fences, re-roofs, plumbing, mechanicals,
Probably flat fees.
standalones, those are all flat fees, yes. But the ones where there's a valuation basis, that's required field,
Okay.
and we do have to have that information.
And then what I do is quarterly, I will be preparing a, why is it doing that, sorry. So actually, while I'm doing this is a great opportunity for me to help introduce you how to navigate around our website so you can find stuff in case you need to. So this is our website. If someone wants to apply for a permit, they can do it online. If they want to pay bills, they would go to this green tab. If you want to look at agendas, you click on that button right there. So again, it's this Civic Web, and it takes you to here. Why is it zoomed in?
Because you hit the plus and minus at the top of it, go back to that tab right there, see the plus and minus right
Yes.
there?
Oh.
Have you hit that on the other one?
On the other one, yes. I'm not sure why it's zoomed in so much that I can't see anything. Okay, so, sorry, before I do that. So also, if you go to development, community development, departments, community development, there's a lot of information that you can find directly on here, including the Planning Commission information, comprehensive plan, shoreline program. If you go to our main department page, you'll be able to find information on the left-hand side, including documents and our codes and ordinances and that kind of stuff. So our website is relatively easy to navigate, except for when you're in the public and everybody's watching you, right?
Try that minus, see if that opens up.
You see the
those three
Can-
dots up there, yeah, let's see if there should be a zoom in
Can you
there.
scroll your mouse? And make it smaller? There you go.
You know, Travis, we were at the city council meeting the other night. I went out to the civic website, the current agendas weren't out there for that meeting. They
So,
should have been. Okay, so that's nice.
yeah, so it should be because like we're doing tonight, we are using the actual live website to go up and down the agenda. So for example, when you go to Civic Web, this is what comes up. So tonight's meetings and the upcoming meetings are in this right-hand column. When you click on that, it will open up today's agenda. And that's actually what I use to follow along as the meeting progresses. So you should be able to find the most recent stuff here. Okay, so quarterly report. So in this report, it talks about the types of applications and the projects that we're currently working on in this month. There's some of the building data that we had discussed. Some code enforcement issues that she's working on. In this quarter, what I did is I threw some extra data in here that I've been coming across and accumulating over time. So for example, what this is discussing and this is showing is City of Woodland data, historical data. So in 2014 versus 2018, the median house price in the City of Woodland has gone up an average of 6.8% per year. And our average house price is $212,000 compared to Cowlitz County, which is $189,000 and $272,000 in Clark County. So what it shows is our house values are raising 6% per year. That's considerable. The next interesting stat is median household income. The average household in Woodland, between 14 and 18, it dropped from 65,000 on average to 64,000. So as our housing is going up, our actual average income is going down, which is not a worrying trend.
I think
Right.
your median household income categories got drugged down from the house prices.
What's that?
I think your median household incomes for Cowlitz and Clark County there, they're probably the house prices.
So, yeah.
Because,
Oh, yeah.
They have better jobs in
I mean,
Yes.
come on, I work in Clark County, that's nowhere close. So come on
Good
now.
catch. Good catch. You're right. So that's a mistake in my report.
Like, what?
That's not
I was like,
accurate.
wait.
I need to start getting on monster.com.
Exactly.
Travel time from the census data, the average commute for a resident in Woodland is 25.2 minutes. Average commute for Clark County is 26.4, and the average commute for Cowlitz County residents is 24.6. Persons in poverty has actually dropped almost 3% since 2014. So it's interesting that poverty rate is dropping, yet our income is dropping. So what it shows is that we're as our population grows.
What are you using for the poverty rate?
So these are statistics I pulled out of documents that are otherwhere. So
So
I
you don't know what the
I don't know the
problem is.
underlying. I just thought
Yeah,
it
it
was.
might be that poverty rate that hasn't changed in the last 20 years, you
Yeah.
know?
And this one I thought was interesting because the homes for sale on the market, like if you go to Zillow, it shows 17, which is less than 1%. The rentals, there are 2 rentals available in Woodland right now. There's actually more Airbnbs available than there are rentals for people who want to move to Woodland. Yeah. Yeah. So those are some stats. So I'm going to try to continue to try and find interesting stats to put up there. So residential new construction. This represents the 2016 through the current year's 2016 through 2018 residential development. So you can see down here from the previous report we've been looking at, you can see how many were built in January, February, March, April, across the bottom. And what it shows is that we generally have, as people build more and more houses by the end of the year, so it's a trend, but there's no clear pattern, that it doesn't all happen in the summer or the spring. It occurs throughout the year, except for this year. So this year we've had two building permits issued in April, and then 2 building permits issued in May. And so this year we're kind of a little off trend, because there's not a lot of residential development occurring.
We have 7 units currently in review.
Yes.
What is on the 2019 and the 4 all the way out through December?
Nothing else has been issued yet.
So, is that cumulative?
Yeah, cumulative
Yeah.
for the year, so we're only at 4 at the time this report was run. So yeah. so we-
Technically, the line shouldn't continue past the
That
month
should
we're in,
change
probably.
next quarter. We have 7 homes in review right now, and there should be some more to follow.
So by next month, it might bump up to 9, but
Did you have available subdivision lots somewhere in there and I missed it?
in the previous years, we did, yes. So I'll get to that, because that's...
Because that seems to be directly related to what we're doing up here.
Yes.
Right, so.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this isn't interesting, because as part of the comprehensive plan update, we were having a lot of conversation about whether or not we should have more residential growth here, because we're getting job growth, and if they don't live here, they're definitely going to have to drive here. So where is the population and where are the trips coming from? So in 2016, the city built 53 units. Clark County built 53 units. That's essentially contributing trips to the Lewis River Basin, or the valley. And then Cowlitz County is contributing 40. So percentage-wise, it was pretty even. So what it says is, for every resident who drives through exit 21, 36% of the new residents were from the city, 36% were probably from Clark County, and 27% or so were from Cowlitz County. But as the city built out its subdivision, by the time we get to last year, we only built 39 housing units last year. Clark County built 48, and Cowlitz County built 64. So when you're looking at the traffic growth, it's not necessarily because the city is growing, but because we're getting inundated from trips and traffic, and other development is affecting the city. So that's kind of an interesting, a staggering stat. Now, the other thing that I did, and that is the city wants to be known as a great opportunity for economic growth, businesses and industrial, commercial growth. And so we have a very business-friendly attitude. And since I've been here, there have been a lot of projects that have come through the permitting process, but those trips are not on the road yet. So as we talked about updating the comprehensive plan, the number one issue that came up was traffic. And so that traffic is past development. Future development, and there's a considerable amount of it, is going to further impact us as that development continues to occur. So our comprehensive plan shows a lot of commercial and industrial land for development, and this is kind of a track record of our progress in the last 18 months. So we've approved about 1,233 PM peak hours, so evening rush hour trips that are going to result from new development that the city is seeing. So we're seeing a considerable amount of population growth, job growth and commercial and industrial growth. But those trips, those trucks, those employees have not started showing up on our road yet. So to date, only about 8% of the approved trips are on our roads. But we also know that for every one trip that we create, there's also likely to be one trip from Clark County, one trip from Cowlitz County. So this was kind of a sobering statistic that I wanted to get out for the public to start thinking about having that conversation
So
about.
most of these trips are happening out in the bottoms
For residential growth,
on the industrial.
okay, so the industrial growth has not hit yet,
Most of that is.
but this is only our industrial. Now, the industrial is kind of a black box, because I don't know any data about Cowlitz County or Clark County industrial trip generation. I know ours, industrial and commercial growth, and I know their residential. So I can compare our apple to their apple, but now you're talking about peaches and pears when we're talking commercial
So
and industrial.
my question here is the top projects, the port, all of those, are those industrial?
Those are industrial. The blue corresponds to the blue on the map, and the pink corresponds to the pink on the map.
So it's both.
Yeah.
If you look
Sorry,
in
you
your
can't
flyer,
see very well.
if you look in your flyer,
In your packet, yeah, so it's
Oh,
much.
Sorry.
okay, so that's
Sorry.
blue under.
Sorry.
So those are all industrial, and those are happening on the bottoms, right?
No, so these are city industrial projects.
yeah, those are city.
City.
So this map,
Yeah.
Okay, am I wrong to assume that Clark, the old road, that those two, that they're both on the other side of the railroad tracks? And that technically we can think that is bottoms as soon as you cross those railroad tracks?
Yes, so it is in the bottoms, but it's in the city portion of the
It's
bottoms.
in the city portion
Yes,
of the bottoms.
it absolutely
So-
is the bottoms.
And there's like, those are gonna be semis, and it looks like there's 300 semis. Is that a day or is that over a year?
So this is the evening hour every
Oh,
day.
this is between 5 and 7, that there's gonna be 300 semis trying to get through Dyke Access
And they
Road.
might not all be semis, because at the end of the day, it might be the truck drivers who get in their car and drive home. So the trucks might go, all day long, but the evening rush hour, it might be all
But
cars.
that's a big issue, because Dyke Access Road is completely blocked right now from 3 until 5, and so is coming off of Glory from 3 until 5. So if there's gonna be another 300 in just that top part, the first two that are gonna hit the roads at that time, I think there's seems, when are they gonna start building that?
That is, I don't have an exact question, or an exact answer to that, because I don't know exactly when they're going to build. Part of your role as the planning commission is to help them prioritize and make decisions and answer that question.
I mean, does that seem like that we might have a bit of a risk there?
Part of,
this would be what she was talking about at the on Tuesday.
When, not
Remember
to,
to wind up
not-
Tuesday. Wind up Tuesday.
not to reopen something that was already argued as nauseum, but one of the things, or one of the ideas that were being batted about when we were talking about developing residentially and annexing large portions of the bottoms was to obtain traffic impact fees for each lot from those developers
Right,
in order to
and now
apply,
they're
in
not doing
order
that,
to
right.
apply to these issues that we need to fix.
Well, and I think that's a big issue there too, because the city doesn't want to do that.
Exactly,
So,
and
you know.
so we're in a bind,
The the city is interested in it.
the state is not.
What's that?
The state is not, from what I understand,
Oh.
right?
Well, I think there was a lot of citizen out, a lot of citizen participation as soon as they found out that they wanted to annex the bottoms. And that was not really favorable.
So as a part of our discussion, the city interest is to consider a lot of that. The county and the rural residents don't necessarily have the same interest as the city though.
Right, and maybe there's people in the city that don't have that same interest.
Certainly.
So, okay.
But
Okay,
as
that-
far as the traffic concern goes, from what I understand, the city has offered money on the table, and some of that, whether it be, grant money, fell off the table because the feds didn't want to provide that money?
Yes.
So, transportation funding is extremely competitive, and we're actually going through this conversation next Monday. They continued our transportation discussion until next Monday. So, the way it works is we have to identify a bunch of projects that will fix our infrastructure, our transportation system, and then we prioritize them, and then we figure out, okay, what can we actually pay for it? And so this list goes from huge to medium to small or to very small. And then what we do is we send that list on to our regional transportation planning group, which is out of Kelso in Longview. And they put it on a regional map, and they compare us to everybody else in Cowlitz County and the other counties that we partner with. And we prioritize against them. And sometimes that's a political prioritization as well as the actual need. And then they forward that on to the state, and the state takes everybody's list and compares them and prioritizes them. And so all of a sudden our big list becomes a very small number, and we become a very small fish in a very big pond, and the money gets allocated based upon that. So sometimes what we need now might take 5 or 10 years to actually get on somebody's radar to get funding. And so we need to have our money ready when they have their money ready, or, you know, do we keep saving our money and not making road improvements while we're waiting for the big fish to be landed? Or do we just spend our money nickel and dime little projects and forget about ever saving our money?
So one of my questions is, then how do we manage this? Because really, that transportation problem has to be resolved. But right now, today that's a problem. Before all that industrial gets built, today that's a problem. Every one of those new projects is going to cause just, right now, everybody's complaining about the traffic. Wherever they're coming in from, it's horrible. So, I mean, it seems like we can't just keep on approving permits if we don't have transportation, if we don't have infrastructure for it.
And this issue came up recently when we were having a conversation with Department of Ecology, Department of Transportation about one of our applicants. It's a large truck trip generator, and Department of Transportation raised a concern. And they asked us to consider not approving the permit. And my response was, okay, so if we don't approve the permits, you want us to make more room at our streets for county trips? If you tell us no, you have to tell them no. And their answer was, well, we can't technically tell them no. We can't also technically tell you no. So, you know, one of the things we have to weigh in that is if we stop development, it's just going to clear road for somebody else to use our roads because we don't have traffic. So even if we were to institute moratoriums.
Going forward with development, I mean, that's one of the biggest issues right now in the city. Everybody's complaining about that. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is, Travis, but I don't think the answer is, well, if we don't use the road, somebody else is going to use the road. Because right now, everybody else is using the road, and there's not any room there. I really have that infrastructure in there. No one's going to want to spend an hour trying to get to the freeway.
Yes, and this was part of the conversation, and it was part of the justification for us not expanding the urban growth boundary for that exact reason.
But had they expanded the road boundary, they would have been getting more money for other things.
Yeah, and it is a double-edged sword. Under growth management, we can collect impact fees, so we can collect new development, like new houses. They have to pay money for parks, and it's like significant amounts of money for park improvements. Pay for the school district, so they contribute money to pay off or to help build new infrastructure at schools. Fire district, they help pay off debt for the fire station and acquire equipment for the fire district. And the other one is schools. transportation. And so new growth actually in some cases contributes like the equivalent of 8 to 9 years worth of tax revenue for going forward. So in other words, if we're looking at buying a new fire truck, it might take the current residents 10 years to save the amount of money that new houses contribute in the first year they're built. So while we're looking at traffic problems, it may actually help taxpayers pay off the school debt and fire station debt faster. So the question is, are you willing to wait an extra second at the intersection, but you save a ton of money on your fire and your school bills?
You might, but right now that whole thing is that's a whole other discussion of over 30% of our students aren't paying those impact fees.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
you know,
But they would have been.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
If they were in our growth area, they would have.
If they were in our growth area. But according to this, they're coming from Park and Cowles. There's no guarantee that would have been covered.
The Clark portion,
No.
we can't do anything about, but the Cowlitz portion, where
Although
they
they-
can develop anyway without paying anything,
Mhm.
Although Clark
that's what
County
worries me,
does
that they're
pay.
just gonna do it and we won't get anything for it.
And that's, so, yeah, so that's.
Clark County
the
does
issue
pay
with that.
impact fees, like for schools.
Oh,
Clark
yeah, within
County
the school
impact
district,
fees
sorry.
for
Within the school district, they have to pay the school impact fee, sorry. But they don't pay anything for traffic and they don't pay anything for parks.
Yes.
But saying that as well, you know, living here quite a while, we're pretty spoiled as far as traffic goes. If you drive to Vancouver or Portland or Hillsborough or Wilsonville, you're going to sit in traffic for a really long time. So to sit here for 15 minutes going through town, we're spoiled, I think. I mean, you can't stop growth, and we need the tax revenue to pay for things. For
Because like I have another house down in Chandler, Arizona, where the population is significantly larger than here, and we have no wait times on the roads there because the infrastructure is always starting to build.
Well-
So, you know, you can do things differently.
We don't have a lot of room for growth within the city, though, as far as residential goes and commercial. I
There
mean,
could be lots of topographical reasons for that too. And
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Chandler, but because of where the river sits and then where these mountains are, we're kind of stuck with these only two exits. Man, if we had one more exit, it would really help.
Yeah.
But-
I
but
think
you
We
the
don't.
fact is that we're stuck with a very limited delivery. And if that delivery is that limited and it's already taxed, it makes, I think that's a decision that you have to start putting out to the community is, you know, we're planning on taxing this, doubling the taxation rate on our roads right now, and we're not going to improve them. Are you guys okay with that? You know? Because I don't think they would.
Well, and again, we've had hours and hours, and we're not discussing it tonight because it's not on the agenda. But this is what we do up here, though. That you're in it right now. First meeting, you're talking about what we, you know,
Oh, I'm
what
just
fills
commenting.
this room is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I'm just commenting, it sounds like the comment is, oh, that's just the way it is. And, you know, I don't think that's what we're here for. I think if we really think about what's happening, I think that's the right answer.
And that's why you're on the board, because you have
Yeah,
you have an I don't want to say, you seem to have a less growth lean, and that's
No,
good to have that,
I
because
think I have
maybe
that.
some people have more of a growth lean, and
I
that's,
think
you know.
I have an infrastructure lane, is can we do an infrastructure? And does that make sense?
Without it, you're not willing to vote for growth, perhaps. But this is why we hammer all this stuff out, make compromises, and do the best we can. And then the city can either disregard what we argue about for 3 hours or not.
Okay, so that's kind of it. We won't necessarily have to cover this part of it every meeting once we get through it, unless you want to talk to me about stuff that's on the reports. I'll just continue to send it to you, and you can read it at your leisure.
Perfect.
Okay, I lost track of where we're at. Are we getting close to wrapping this up, Travis?
You are.
All right, let's wrap this up. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Anyone?
I just have a
Yes,
question.
please.
I wanted to clarify something that, I think it was you, Kim, that asked me about liens. And I know, I think my answer was like 5 to 6. And now that I'm thinking about maybe what you said, you were asking for a specific time period, but my 5 to 6 would have been what I'm thinking of, that I've been involved in since I've been here. So I just wanted to
Oh, in
clarify.
total, that-
Yeah,
Yeah, I just asked because, you know, like, I deal with, you know, my mom was a senior. We had a lot of fixed income here. And, you know, liens like that, and if they're going into perpetuity, that's very punitive to what was a large portion of our population. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, but I just wanted to clarify, when you were asking, I think now that I'm thinking about it, it was like you were asking for a time frame, maybe of last year.
Right.
And I said 5 to 6, that's what I'm thinking of, that I've been involved in since I've been here. Just to
5 to
clarify
6
that.
in 10 years.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thanks.
Does anybody else have anything else they want to say before we wrap it up?
I move to adjourn.
All in favor say no, I guess. Let's adjourn. Oh, am I supposed to bang the gavel?
You may if you wish.
You may bang that gavel.
I will now close the public meeting at 9:15, I think it says.
9:22.
9:22, I got a glare on
There's a
me.
glare on the cloth, we really can't see it.
Is this your?
You have done fantastic.